May examination session 2021. I'm an IB language and literature student. Today, in my individual oral, I'm going to be discussing the global issue of identity, more specifically, the idea of what it means to be a father in times of war. To do so, I'm going to work with two texts. The first is a poster from the Parliamentary Recruiting Committee from 1915 entitled, "Daddy, What Did You Do in the Great War?" In the text, we see a daughter on her dad's lap with a book open, presumably asking her dad this question. In the second text, Macbeth by William Shakespeare, a timeless piece of literature, often known for ideas surrounding ambition, power, and tyranny, also very interestingly deals with fatherhood. In the scene I've chosen from Act 4, Scene 2, Lady Macduff is engaged in a conversation with Ross, where she is questioning her husband's actions to leave them. It is through both of these texts that we understand what it means to be a father. Unfortunately, war is a global phenomenon. And while both texts focus on identity, and therefore I'm going to center my oral around an exploration of identity, really it's the question of what does it mean to be a father in a time of war? The poster very specifically answers this question. Fathers fight. Fathers serve their country. Fathers take action. This is what a good father does. This is evidenced in the language of the poster. Quote, "Daddy, what did you do in the Great War?" has a tone of almost innocent curiosity, the diminutive of daddy, with the question at the end, and the child, an image of her looking up at her father, suggests that there's only one right answer. That to be a father during war is to be somebody who was a soldier, who protected her, who brought her the freedom that they have right now. And the freedom they have is exemplified in the setting. The authors create an image of a pleasant, or create this pleasant atmosphere. It's well furnished, a well-off or enough off family. A child is reading, the boy is playing with toy soldiers, and the book and the toy soldiers are symbols almost of the freedom that they have because of the father's sacrifices that he made to fight for them in a time of war. The composition aids to that fact. The daughter takes center stage. She's in the center of the poster, and her gaze at her father helps us as a viewer looking at this, presumably a man in the time of World War I, not yet enlisted, to say, what would be my answer to my daughter sitting on my lap? And of course, the answer for a father can only be one thing: I fought. Which the facial expression gives us. The authors create a pensive father, wondering what his answer is going to be. And that pensive image, as the viewer looks at it, he knows what his answer has to be. I fought for my country, for my daughter. Broadening this out to the larger body of work, we see three common stylistic elements in this poster and in two others that I want to talk about today. There's the direct address of you. In this poster, it is capitalized, it is underlined. It is telling the audience, looking at this poster, wondering, where are you in this war? The poster titled, "Who's Absent? Is it You?" And the poster titled, "There's Still a Place in Line for You. Will you fill it?" asks the viewer to join, to be a part of a larger purpose. Of course, all three posters use a second common element, the use of questions. But these questions, of course, are both rhetorical and only have one right answer. There's no ambiguity. There's no discussion of possibilities or differences or complexities. You fight. And the third element in this is a demanding tone, a tone that says you can do only one thing as a father. Finally, one other poster within this larger body of work, entitled "Women of Britain Say Go," is quite interesting in this discussion. It is in this poster that we see the gendered expectations of the time. Two women with a young child are looking out to soldiers fighting. What it implies is that a father leaves his family. A father leaves his children. And that the wife believes that this is the right thing to do. This is, of course, in direct contrast to Shakespeare's Macbeth. And that's because literature is going to be more complex and more subtle. In this passage from Act 4, Scene 2, Lady Macduff argues a father doesn't abandon his children in times of war. No, a father protects his children. He does the opposite. The passage opens with Lady Macbeth saying, "Wisdom?" A rhetorical question said almost sarcastically or mockingly to Ross. It's not smart to leave his children. It's foolish. And Lady Macbeth is characterized by Shakespeare as smart enough to know the difference. Shakespeare then gives Lady Macduff the speech to leave his wife, to leave his babes, his mansion, and his titles in a place from whence himself does fly. Listing 4 different things in parallel order of all that Macduff has given up. To the audience, this characterization of Macduff is harsh. He's off stage, something that, of course, you can only do in drama. And Lady Macduff is giving, or telling us as the audience, that he's given up everything possible. This is furthered by the metaphor that she uses, discussing the poor wren, who is the most diminutive of birds, who will fight her young ones in her nest against the owl. The wren, of course, being Macduff, the owl, of course, being Macbeth. But Macduff leaves. She's saying, even this bird, and an image of this bird who cannot fight, who is small, who is nothing, will go up against the mighty owl, the predator, the tyrant. She's questioning his decision as a father. And that's how the passage ends. Fathered he is, and yet he's fatherless. A paradox. How is the son, who is also standing on stage, who has a biological father but is absent? That's no father at all in Lady Macduff's eyes. And the way Shakespeare is presented, what it means to be a father in a time of war, well, through Lady Macduff's eyes, it's he's awful, he's abandoned, he's left them. Ross, of course, believes differently, that Macbeth is noble, wise, judicious, and best knows the fits of the season. That's up for the audience to decide, because in Act 4, Scene 3, we realize that Lady Macduff and her children are dead. We watch Macduff grieve his family openly in front of the future King Malcolm. We see the pain and the sacrifice that has been brought because he has left them. He, of course, avenges their deaths in Act 5, Scene 8, when he ultimately kills Macbeth. Frees Scotland of the tyrant. Allows freedom, or more freedoms, to reign. But I think what is most interesting is the difference between Macduff and Banquo. Banquo in Act 3, Scene 1 and Scene 3 is characterized as someone so loving that he dies for Fleance to live. Now, yes, they're riding off together and they're being attacked. But here we have a father who has not abandoned his child. Here we have a father who has given up his life so his child can live. And I think that is the key difference between these two texts. There's sacrifice in war, and Shakespeare shows that there is sacrifice. Do you save your country but have your family killed? Or do you save your child but your country's in tatters? The propaganda poster doesn't deal with this at all. And so in conclusion, this global issue matters because how a father views his identity could be the difference between life and death. Propaganda works on almost what I'm going to call these harsh techniques. Direct address, a question that has only one right answer, a demanding tone. Shakespeare is working with the complexities of character, the multiple decisions and consequences of each action, the ways in which others view each other, and how fatherhood is presented. Propaganda doesn't do that, because propaganda's sole goal is to get you to enlist in war, where literature and what Shakespeare's trying to do is show the nuance or subtlety of what it means to be a father. And what it means to be a father is sacrifice. Propaganda doesn't give any sacrifice. This man in the poster might not actually live. He might be maimed. He might be so traumatized. And that's what's important in understanding this global issue today.
Okay, thanks for that, Tim. So I'm going to stick with Macbeth for a sec because that's kind of where you finish in terms of the extract. And I want you to explore a little bit more for me about, you sort of mentioned Ross and that line in lines sort of 12 and 13, I think he's noble wise. How does this fit in with the kind of implications for the role of a father in what Ross discusses there?
So Ross 9:16 is talking about, from what we fear, we know not what we fear, but float upon a wild and violent sea. And this image of this wild and violent sea, because of fear, pushing us around almost aimlessly. And Shakespeare presents this image through, of course, Ross's dialogue, is Ross believes that Macduff is making the right decision, both as a man and as a father, that fear cannot be what consumes us. And that Macduff isn't fearful, that his children will ultimately be proud of what he has done. And of course the irony is, his children are alive to see what he's done.
Okay, and you also mentioned that there's this beautiful contrast set up between the fatherhood or the role that Banquo plays in protecting his son versus Macduff here. In these complexities and these subtleties that you've talked about, do you feel as though there's anything in the play that gives us any kind of definitive conclusion or sort of a stronger message in terms of the implications of those choices, in which way might be seen as a more valuable choice?
Macduff is obviously dealt with more, especially at the end of the play. Banquo doesn't appear again. Mm-hmm. We have the sense that you need to overcome tyranny, and that a father needs to sacrifice, and that the ultimate sacrifice is your family. And that's hard because we watch him grieve really, really painfully in Act 4, Scene 3. And so I think when I look at the two, there's less development of Banquo, and so the implications are, you must do this for your country. It is for the greater good.
Okay, thanks. And if we go back to the poster, you were talking about these symbols of freedom that the children are working on. I just wondered if there's anything more significant about those symbols that are there in the picture and how they might add or further complicate the suggestions about the role of fatherhood here.
The son is playing with toy soldiers, something that many young boys do. It's a game. And of course, the paradox is, war is not a game. War is deadly. War is harsh. And so, does the father, who has been to war, presumably, because he can answer his daughter's question, yes, I fought, tell his son, no, actually, this is not what you want to be doing? A good father is one who says, I fight for peace, and actually not fight, I argue for peace? That's who a real man is? Stop playing with these toys? So in one end, yes, I argued that they're possibly the freedom to live the life that they want, to be able to play and do anything. But on the other hand, a question arises about, do you want your son to do the same thing you have?
Okay, and you also mentioned, when you were talking about the body of work here, you mentioned several other posters, 3 other posters in particular, and you thought there was a range here because you've got a gendered expectation as well. And you were clear very much that, maybe it was implicit, but that this is very much aimed at fathers, this poster, as a response. But how might other members of an audience watching this that might not be fathers, how might they respond, and how might that complicate the way in which a potential father might respond here to this?
What's interesting is I don't think necessarily this is aimed at fathers. Mm-hmm. I think it just presents a characterization of fatherhood. You're 18 years old. You haven't enlisted yet. It's World War I. Britain needs more men in the army. What it's doing is setting yourself in the future, when you are a father, and in an ideal setting, 2 kids, presumably a wife, a wonderful home. What are you going to tell those kids? And so here this 18-year-old looking at this poster, who is not a father, wants to be able to say to his child what we might consider the right thing. And the right thing a father says is, I fought for my country.
Okay, thank you.
That's the end of this individual oral.